Good morning and welcome to Community Forum, our weekly public affairs program where we address a number of topics of interest in northeastern Pennsylvania. I'm Jim Riley, and I don't know if anything's more interesting than this. It is always a popular subject for a show of this type, and I'm speaking about the Agnes flood of 1972. And my guest this morning is Alan K. Stout, who is in charge, 9 to 5, of the Luzerne County Visitors Bureau. But he is greatly involved with a film that debuted last year for the 50th anniversary, and it's going to be screened a second time this coming Friday. 23rd is the Friday?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Alan, welcome to Community Forum.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Okay, let's get right to it. Where and when is this screening going to take place?
This will be Friday night, June 23rd at the FM Kirby Center in downtown Wilkes-Barre. 7:30 p.m. start. Once again, all the proceeds will go to the Wilkes-Barre Preservation Society, and tickets are only $10.
Now, the use of the Kirby Center, it's a slam dunk because of the Kirby Center. That's what it's there for. But it was heavily damaged in the flood as the Paramount Theater. Is there sort of like a full circle thing here with this?
You know, there really is. The Paramount Theater is in the movie. It's in the documentary. There's actually a scene in the film where a boat drives right by the marquee, and the film A Clockwork Orange was playing.
Yes.
And so when people we debuted the film last year on June 23rd on the 50th anniversary, sold out crowd. And I think that there was a little bit of maybe a little bit of a gasp in the theater at that moment when they saw that scene, and they realized that where I'm sitting right now would have been maybe under 12 feet of water.
Yeah.
So yeah, certainly we actually have had there have been several promotional posters for Agnes, but the one that we've been the most consistent with actually has downtown Wilkes-Barre and the Kirby Center on the poster.
Okay. Why the decision to rerun it?
Well, what happened last year, and everything that we do with Agnes is a team decision. There were 4 of us that worked on the film. Myself, I was the executive producer, and I wrote it. Tim Novotny, who was our extremely talented co-director and editor and spent countless hours on this film. Bob Savakinis, who co-directed the film and was really the one who got the film back on track when we tried to do it for the 40th anniversary. And Bob revisited us about 3 years ago and said, let's try to do this for 2022. And Tony Brooks from the Wilkes-Barre Preservation Society, who was our historical consultant. So we worked as a team on this. And I believe it was Bob, actually, who said we should bring it back. I know it was. It was Bob who said we should bring it back next year. And we weren't sure. We showed it 4 times last year at the Kirby. We had it at the drive-in a few times in the fall. But Bob said, every year around that date, Agnes is going to be discussed. It might not be discussed in the same way that it was last year because the 50th anniversary was a big deal, and all the news agencies ran with it.
Yes.
The newspapers were doing special editions, and the TV stations were doing retrospectives. We had already been working on our project for years at that point. And so we know all that isn't going to happen this year, but why not bring it back for the people that missed it last year, the people that want to see it again, the people that came to it last year but said, I really wish I brought my parents or my kids or my grandkids.
Yeah.
And so even if there's, last year we had 4,000 people saw it at the Kirby. If this year 400 people see it, so what? That's 400 people that hadn't seen it before.
Is this going to be educational, or is it just historic to take us back? I mean, is there any nostalgia involved?
Well, the educational component to the movie was really important to us. I know me personally, when I was working on writing it and picking out photographs that would be in it, I always had hoped that in addition to showing it at the Kirby in June, that in the fall of 2022, we could take it out to the schools. I wasn't sure how that would go. Would they go for it? I didn't want to just drop off a DVD at the superintendent's office or the school office and say, hey, I hope your social studies teachers will show this in class, because we know how that goes. When you're a kid and you walk into the classroom and you see the projector.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
you think,
you do cartwheels back to your desk.
Oh,
yes, you do.
I was hoping that maybe they would actually turn it into more of an event at the schools as an assembly and bring all the kids in to the auditorium and see it on the big screen and have the same experience that the people had at the Kirby. And what a blessing it was. They did it. And so we were at Wilkes-Barre area. About 3,000 kids saw it in Wilkes-Barre, Wyoming Valley West High School, Hanover High School, Holy Redeemer High School, King's College, Luzerne County Community College, Wilkes University. We took it out all over the place last fall. And some of the parochial schools, Good Shepherd Academy, St. Nick, St. Mary's, Wyoming Area Catholic, all the schools that really were in the floodplain, we got it out there. And the educational component was huge. We heard from the parents afterwards through our social media. My son saw your film today at Holy Redeemer. It's all he's talking about. He's asking us all these questions. He's talking to his grandfather. He's asking him about it. Thank you for bringing it to the school. And so that was exactly what we hoped might happen.
How about the material? How was that collected?
That was collected over the course of a long time, although a lot of it was actually done back in 2010, 2011. There were 4 really good books that were published on Agnes at the time, pictorial books. A lot of people have them. They're kind of like yearbook style hardcover books. Mm-hmm. A lot of people still have them up in the attic or on the bookshelf. Those pictures in those books, sometimes there were hundreds of them that were in each book. So you scan that picture in today, high res, and you put it up on a big screen. They were done by professional photographers. So these are amazing photographs that got to be seen maybe in a way that they had never been seen before. All of the folks that had published those books, or their descendants, if they had passed on, gave us permission to use those photos. All of the local TV networks gave us their footage that they had. I'm talking about WNEP and BRE and YOU and the former WYOU. People submitted home videos when we asked for that. Some of that made it into the movie. People submitted photographs. Some of the most stirring pictures in the film were submitted to us by people. They weren't in any of the books, so they had never really been seen anywhere before. There's a picture of a horse in a field down in 40 Fort, Wyoming, near the airport, pulling a coffin through the field. That it had, I guess they were using horses to get these coffins out of the mud that had washed down from the 44th Cemetery. Incredible photograph that I had never seen, and unless you were in the family of these people, had never seen before. And the network footage too. That was the big one, because that had to be tracked down and licensed, and in some cases, paid quite a bit of money for. But we thought it was important for the film to have that national network coverage in the movie.
How much new stuff was there, previously unseen and unused?
All of the interviews that we did were new. The ones that Tim and Bob went out and actually sat down and talked to people for. So there's probably 10 interviews in the film that were brand new, just done for the 50th anniversary. The network footage, some of it was acquired. And, I don't want to say it wasn't seen before, because it may have been seen on the news for 3 minutes 51 years ago.
Right.
So it was seen. But, one of the things that we said all the time was, if you were in Agnes in 72 and you had evacuated, watching the news that night or those 3 or 4 days before you got to return to your home was probably the last thing on your mind. And so a lot of folks probably never saw the Walter Cronkite coverage or the John Chancellor coverage or the Dan Rather coverage of Agnes. And so was it seen before? Yeah, it was for a few minutes 50 years ago, but never in a film.
And I suspect taking movies of it back then may not have been a priority either. I mean, I think today, that's, just, for insurance purposes or something.
Sure.
But back then, it was harder to do. The cameras were more complicated. And, you had people who were just getting out of there with whatever they could grab at a moment's notice.
Everybody today has a phone and a video camera in their pocket 24/7. I mean, you saw it in 2011 even. When the water got so high. You saw some incredible pictures that people were posting on social media. Back then, Some people had some wonderful pictures and some home video, but a lot of people didn't. You were getting out of your house at 5 o'clock in the morning. You were scrambling to get your probably your cherished items. Some people didn't even do that. They didn't think it was going to be that bad. I was looking through my mother's photo albums, working on this project, obviously. I wanted to see what we had. And there's a big gap in her photo album in 1972 from Easter till Christmas.
Yeah.
There's none. There's no photos. It's the last thing on her mind. We were in South Wilkes-Barre. We got hammered. And so, she was working, not taking pictures.
Yeah. What criteria did you use to vote yay or nay on whether something would get in?
Quality, of course, historical significance. We really wanted one of the things that I noticed even when we did a little slideshow back in 2010 or 2011 to promote the project when it first started was structures that are in the Wyoming Valley that have not changed, that look the same. Churches, schools, courthouse, they resonate with people when they see them in the film.
Yeah.
They see something that they still drive by every day, particularly, I would say, Jim, for the younger generation. Because if you don't remember the flood and you've heard about it your whole life, and then you see the Wilkes-Barre post office underwater, which looks exactly the same today pretty much as it did in 1972, or the synagogue on River Street near Wilkes University, or King's College campus, or Public Square, I think for some reason something clicks in your mind where you think, oh, this really did happen here. That's my school. We took it out to Good Shepherd Academy, and that was the Bishop O'Reilly High School or Central Catholic High School at the time. And there it is. It's underwater. And, the kids, you see their reaction. That's our school.
Yeah.
And the first floor is underwater. And so I know that when I was working with Tim on selecting, I was going through the books and I would send it to him and I would say, here are some pictures for the flood segment. Here are some pictures for the post-flood segment. I was looking for photos like that maybe people would still recognize today as familiar landmarks and realize that this was very much a Wyoming Valley incident. Another thing was there were just some poignant pictures that were just powerful. There was a picture of it looked like a father and his teenage son working in post-flood, and they're just covered with mud. Their arms are covered with mud. Their clothes are covered with mud. They look tired. And someone just snapped this photo of them just maybe taking a 30-second break between, the shovels and the look on, they're looking at each other, and it's a powerful photograph. And so try to get images like that into the film as well, obviously.
Is this the exact same film? Has it been updated any in the past year?
No, this is the same film. Yes, it's the same one that was released on DVD and that showed at the Kirby. I think I know personally when I was from my end, and I'm sure that the other guys feel the same, we don't want it to have to be updated. It was...
Well, you didn't find any new material?
No, haven't looked, actually. I think when we work so hard on turning every stone you could imagine, looking for the best photos, the best videos, the best home videos, the best submitted videos, the best stuff from the networks, that we wanted it to be the definitive one, that you could show it on the 60th anniversary, and this would still be the one that would tell you the story of Agnes.
Talking with Alan K. Stout about his documentary on the Agnes flood and a screening that'll take place on Friday the 23rd at the Kirby Center, 7:30 p.m. What sort of feedback did you get last year?
Wow. That was, when you work on something for so long and you work as a team, and Tim and I and Bob and Tony, we must have sat and watched it together 3 or 4 times down the stretch, looking for things that we might want to change, or looking for even typos in the captions. And you're doing that final look, and so you see. By the time it shows in the Kirby, you've seen it. And Tim probably saw it 50 times. I probably saw it 6 or 7. You don't know. We're happy with it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be, releasing it. But the very first showing, as soon as the closing credits started to come up and the entire Kirby Theater burst into applause, and there's, like people standing, and you felt like, okay, so far so good. And then that happened every single time. And then there were letters to the editor written about it from even the Luzerne County manager wrote a letter to the editor about it. And our Facebook page just exploded with beautiful comments. We immediately had a couple more shows because of the sellouts. The second show in the evening was 1,600, 1,700 people. The afternoon show, I think, had 800. We brought it back in September. The feedback was terrific. And then we took it out to the schools, and it was the same. It was the kids just, literally bursting into applause at the end of the film in these auditoriums with sometimes thousands of kids there. And, I got a little emotional because I always hoped that we could get it in front of them. And I wanted to teach them about what their parents and their grandparents went through, and hopefully have them maybe look at their hometown in a different way. And you got to see it happen. Got a little teary-eyed in some of those auditoriums a few times to see those kids then come up to us afterwards when we were standing out in the lobby, and having the teachers come up and the principals and thanking us for bringing it there. I think that what they did was they maybe even had a new perspective on their own grandparents and their own families. They were cheering for that's what they were. Did they like the movie? Is that why they applauded? Certainly. But it was more than that. They were cheering for their town. They were cheering for maybe their own grandparents or parents. And that was a beautiful thing to see.
Were you and your team, Tony Brooks and Bob Savakinis and Tim, the name escapes me,
Novotny,
sorry.
yeah.
Tim Novotny, thank you. Were you shooting for a particular response, or you just said, let's put the best film together and whatever they think of it, fine?
Tim always would say, we all had our own goals. Alan wanted it to be definitive, and Tony wanted it to be this, and Bob wanted it to be this. And, Tim said he wanted you to feel it. And I did too. And so that is, I think, something that did happen. There were tears in the theater.
That was inevitable, though. Especially if you had someone with firsthand experience.
It was inevitable that you feel it, but there was a couple of things that I think we did that, maybe I hadn't seen done before in some of the other retrospectives. First of all, there's a couple of little behind-the-scenes stories. Our initial plan was to license all this 1972 pop songs. The big hits from 72 would be scattered throughout the movie to give it that time, place. And then you find out that, if we have money to license anything, the video is the most important. That would be a second priority. And then you learn that it's incredibly complicated because the songwriters own half of it and then the labels own half of it. And you need 2 licenses, not just one. And sometimes you could get one and not the other. And meanwhile, Tim's just starting to work on the movie, and he just has this beautiful music that he already has the rights to because of his production company. And it's beautiful, and it's gorgeous. And it's the sandbagger scene was one of the first scenes that, I realized what Tim had done, that we don't need Burnin' Love from Elvis Presley or,
Saturday
I'll Be
in the
Around
Park,
from the Spinners. Yeah. And what Tim had done I thought evoked the emotions even more so. That music may have actually wound up being a distraction. So that's something that we punted on. Another thing that we did, and this is something that, I talked to the guys about when we first started, is sometimes there would be documentaries in the past, little specials on Agnes, and they would have folks talking about it, very personal stories, and they're interesting, because when we went back to our house, we saw this, but I always imagined you come to the Kirby to see the movie, and you want to see a movie about Agnes, and you went through this too, or your family did. wouldn't it be better to have these folks telling stories about Agnes and not have them get into the specific details of their own home or lives, but talk about it from a community perspective? Because that way, if you're sitting there watching the film, that person is speaking for you. He's not speaking to you. We're not going to listen to half a dozen people tell their Agnes stories because it affected 80,000 people. We're going to have people talk about the Agnes story.
And they're probably all very comparable. So if you hear from one resident, that story would apply to just about everybody.
And if you say it that way, it will resonate with them more.
Yeah.
Rather than if you say, our house, and my dad did this, and like when the Greg Fellerman, local attorney, well-known attorney, and a big supporter of the film. We weren't planning on having Greg in the film. He just wanted to support it. But the one day I was talking to him on the phone about how things were going with the production, and he was talking about when he was a kid, remembering, and his memories were exactly the same as mine because we're about the same age. And I said, Greg, would you say this stuff in the film? And if you watch Greg in the film, he doesn't talk about his own house. He doesn't talk about he talks about when you were a kid, you saw things you never saw before. There are army trucks flying down your street every day. There are helicopters buzzing over your house all summer long. Your town was a war zone. And that's exactly how I remember it. And when Greg talks about that in the film, he's talking for all of us that were of that age, not just his own little niche story. Bill Corcoran Jr. from the On the Stacks podcast talks about it from millennials' perspective of seeing these pictures and kind of being blown away that this actually happened in our own town. Joe Buckowitz does the same. He talks about the destruction and the heartache. And so when people were watching the film, I think that maybe the reason that it connected with them the way it did is because the film speaks for them. It doesn't speak to them. And that was by design.
There are a lot of historical productions like this one. Did you take extra pains to make yours stand out differently and not repeat so much of what had already been done as far as a format? And
the story is the story. And so the hurricane came up the coast. The hurricane headed out to sea. The hurricane hung a left and came right with a bullseye towards the Susquehanna watershed. The rivers got high, the sandbaggers, the evacuation, the damage, the recovery. All the documentaries or specials that have been done on Agnes in the past have sort of told the story. I think we tried to humanize it as best we could, not only with showing as many pictures that we could of the destruction, and some of the pictures are just incredible, but I know I may have said this when we were on the show last year, but another thing that I was really proud of with the film, the late Dr. Massari, Dr. Anthony Massari, he was on our film team in the beginning, and he passed away. So he wasn't there with us to see it come to the finish line, unfortunately. But when we were first working on the film, Doc said to me the one night on the phone, "You're not going to be able to replicate the heartache that people felt when they went back to their houses when you do your interviews. Sitting on your front porch," at that point it would have been 40 years later when we first had this conversation, "sitting on your front porch 40 years later with your house that's already been fixed up for 38 years, looking back on Agnes isn't going to convey that emotion."
Right.
Now, Doc had not seen the footage that I had acquired at that point yet, which I had been working on for months. And I said, "Doc, we don't have to recreate it. We have it. We have lots of interviews done the day that people went back to their homes, and they're powerful. And so you are in the moment. And some of this quality of this video is incredible. Especially some of the stuff we got from NBC, just looks like it's shot yesterday, of people, just shocked and in tears over what they found, and their lives had been completely turned upside down. And so I think that our film, maybe that was something that I think we were proud of too, is that, we we did our interviews, and we went out and we interviewed people today, and we acquired all this footage. But some of those interviews that we acquired had never been seen before. There's one of the guys sandbagging, and I don't even know if this actually made it onto the news broadcast, because when we asked for the stuff from the networks, they gave us everything they had, even the B-roll stuff. And this guy was talking about how the young kids down at the sandbaggers, he goes, he was talking about how this was a real point in time, the early 70s, late 60s. The generation gap was never more big in the history of mankind, probably, than the kids from the 60s and early 70s. And, it's Archie Bunker and Mike Stivic. That's exactly who was sandbagging together, if you could imagine it.
Yes.
And they came together beautifully. And the older generation, it's in Dr. Massari's book, and we have a video that we acquired. I'll never say a bad word about these kids again. They came down here, they worked their tails off to help save the city, and the one guy says, I'll never understand these kids, but I'll never say a bad word about them again. And so that's the kind of stuff I had never seen in any other documentary on Agnes.
Is this film commercially available?
There is a limited number of DVDs available. We sold almost 3,000 already. We went through the first pressing immediately. I think they were gone in a week. And then we ordered a second pressing, and that is almost depleted. I believe there will be about 50 copies left for sale at the Kirby on Friday night.
Have you given any thought to the appeal of this event, the flood and the reminiscences and projects like yours? They're foolproof. You can't go wrong with the story on the Agnes flood. People will eat it up.
Yeah, I mean, there's always interest in it. Last year with the 50th, certainly it seemed like it had peaked in a way that I hadn't seen in my life. It was a big anniversary. The 25th back in 97, I do remember the WVIA did some wonderful stuff, including my favorite documentary up until the one that we did that was done by VIA in 97 was terrific. I think, but yeah, I think that, we even say it in the film at one point. In the valley in Luzerne County, we don't even call it Agnes. It's just the flood.
Yeah. It's
just the flood. And things are gauged by it before the flood, after the flood. Well, my dad used to own a shop in 44 before the flood, but then he moved to Mountaintop. And you just say before, after the flood. You don't even realize how many times you probably say it throughout the year. Now, there will be a time when that probably doesn't happen as much anymore, when we're all gone, and nobody, has that experience. But for now, there's still a lot of people that are, in their 60s and 70s and 80s that were younger people that were going through this. And there's still a lot of folks like myself who were kids that remember it well. And so for the time being, and for the next couple of decades at least, there's still going to be a lot of people around here that remember Agnes.
Got about a minute left with Alan, so let's go through the details of this upcoming screening. Where, when?
Again, it'll be Friday night at the FM Kirby Center in downtown Wilkes-Barre. It's at 7:30, and in order to save people money on the ticket price, we ran the tickets just through the Kirby box office. So you can either go down to the Kirby and buy them, or you can buy them by calling the Kirby box office. A $10 ticket, as you know, Jim, if you get into Ticketmaster and everything, winds up being an $18 ticket, which is too much to pay to go to a movie. We all agree. And so just go directly to the Kirby box office or call the Kirby box office, 570-826-1100. And there will be plenty of seats the night of the show this time as well.
Alan K. Stout, my guest, one of four who worked very lovingly on this Agnes historical film, and it is getting a screening for a second year this coming Friday at the Kirby Center for what is the 51st anniversary of the Agnes flood. Alan, continued success with this project. Thanks again for your time.
Thank you, Jim.
I'm Jim Riley. You've been listening to Community Forum, our weekly public affairs program, and we'll have another topic of interest next weekend. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.